Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Tanner Vance Show. It's so good to be back. I haven't been back. I haven't done this in a minute. It's been, Jesus, I think it's been like a month already. Well, I've just been kind of working on myself, and that sounds so cliche, but to be more specific, I tried to get some stuff organized. I, wrote out a list of projects I want to accomplish, things I need to do, things I want to do, steps on how to go about them. I got all organized. I got super into it, which has been super helpful. There's another reason I've been out. It's such a ridiculous reason, but I won't get into it right now and bore you in the intro. I think on my next episode I'll talk about it. I have another one planned coming up. My last episode was I want to say it was the sixth one, where me personally, I did some rambling, and a lot of it was just kind of the difficulty of getting people onto the show, getting just starting something from the ground up, which is why I love this next conversation with Michael Alexander. He was my high school English teacher, great guy. I enjoyed being in his class and all that, and we touch on this, creating and our trying to build a project up from the ground up a little bit, and it was a super interesting, awesome conversation. I'm so glad that he gave me a bit of his time, and I feel super positive about coming back into this. I'm super excited, but I did promise that I would do a shout out for him, because this guy, I went through and I did a little bit of stalking. I admit it. In lieu of my of the episode, I didn't do it just for fun. The fun stalkings are a different thing from the professional stalkings. This was a professional stalking. So I have to admit, or I have to give a little shout out here to Mr. Alexander. Well, I get to call him Mr. Alexander. You call him Michael Alexander. But anyways, he's got a new book coming out, Boarded Windows, Dead Leaves. He does, it's a collection of his short stories. He does little scary stories. I feel like calling them scary stories is almost like a disservice. It's not, but it kind of feels like it, just because they're so good. We talk about it a little bit in this episode. They're interesting from the get-go. In my stalking, of course, I read plenty of them, and they were very interesting, very good, very thought-provoking. Just, I don't know. I had a good time reading them, and I'm looking forward to this. Whenever this comes out, I will buy it, and I'm going to announce it, and I'm looking forward to it. But in the meantime, you could also, and there will be a link to this in the description, there will be a link to this in the description, or at least there will be a mention of it so that you can go check it out yourself. But it's michaeljessalexander.wordpress.com. Again, that's https://michaeljessalexander.wordpress.com. I think you should check it out. He's got some good stuff. I'm really looking forward to it. But in the meantime, sate yourself with this amazing conversation that we had. I had a great time, and yeah, I think that's all I got my rambling. I won't keep you up anymore. Enjoy the episode.
It's always been something that I've been interested in. As far as my my love of literature, that was sparked at a really young age. As far to like a specific moment, I'd be hard pressed to come up with that, but laugh if you must, but the books that actually really hooked me, actually, you know what? It's not necessarily a moment, but I know that you guys still have this, but it was maybe a little bit different back when I was in grade school. But the book fairs at elementary, I just thought that those were so dang cool. And I would always be so excited to peruse the offerings, and so that was really exciting. But the particular books that would always catch my eye were the scary books. So like Goosebumps,
Oh my gosh, yeah, yeah. Was it R.L. Stein?
Yep, yep. And
Yep.
there were other kind of similar anthologies, but they always had not necessarily lurid covers, but really, really catchy covers that, to my adolescent eye, they seemed, um, oh, what's the right word? Not quite forbidden, but almost like this doesn't belong. This is kind of
Right.
in the realm of adult literature, but not quite. And so, I really hovered to those, and um, ever since, it's been a pretty much a lifelong love of the written word. Um,
Sure.
certainly since then, I would like to imagine that my tastes have somewhat matured, but I'll be honest, not a whole lot.
Sure, right? Yeah. Yeah, well, I thought it was a pretty big step when I went from Goosebumps to a Stephen King novel. I felt pretty grown up.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so okay, that's interesting because I was wondering about because I went through and I read plenty of what I could of your work, The Accident, the Laboratory, a Profound Impact, and
Yeah, I
That's
I
one of my
really
more juvenile uh, works, but I'm that's awesome. Thank you.
yeah, of course, yeah, it was because that's I kind of wondered beforehand, before when I even suggested talking to you, I was like, I thought, I know he's written stuff and I know he's done some published work, had some published works and all that, but I was like, I don't have a lot of it. I don't know for sure what he's, he eventually put out there. Like I remember, in school you mentioning your love for zombies and all that. So I knew that it was we could be dealing with some spooky stories and all that, but I mean, you say they're your more juvenile works, but I still liked them just because they were short. And I mean, obviously a short story, but I was interested from the get go, and I was like, I would love to read more of this. I mean, but that,
Well, I'm
but
not.
that
I'm not. Oh, um, I'm not sure if you noticed my post, but just Sunday, I think I did post on my Facebook account, or I finally announced on my Facebook account some relatively big news, but I actually have my first collection coming out.
oh, that's awesome. Okay, so what's it called?
It's called Boarded Windows, Dead Leaves.
Oh, interesting. I didn't see that. That's awesome. Okay, that's a huge step right there to have your own collection.
That's been a big goal of mine. It's going to be a small collection, upwards of 50 or so pages, but in any
okay.
case, it's going to be a standalone collection, and it's just my stories, and um, it is an independent publisher that is putting it together, and I signed the contract on Sunday, so yeah, I'm really quite excited. I can't wait to have the book in my hot little hands.
Yeah, right. No, I will. You have to announce when that's out for all of us. That way, I can, yeah, it can be in all of our hot little hands, even my own. Yeah, awesome. I mean, would you ever consider doing a novel?
you know, um,
I don't know how much. For me, I've tried, but I never finish.
yeah, I've never undertaken, or I've never attempted a longer form work. I think the longest short story that I've written and have had published is, oh gosh, still less than 2,500 words. So um,
Oh, okay.
yeah, not terribly. I don't yet share that in common with a writer like Stephen King. It The words don't pass quite as freely. um,
Sure, sure.
yeah. To answer your question, yes, I would like to do that eventually.
Okay. Yeah. No, like I said, I kind of always started out like trying to take on. I was like, I'm gonna write this great big novel, and I don't ever know what I was thinking. Like short stories are the way to go to really. I don't know. For me, when I kind of started doing that, it was better because I was like, I'm kind of exercising my mind and my ability to start a story, play with the the rising climax and all, playing with the flow of the story and then concluding it and then patting myself on the back that I completed a story.
I share that in common with you. If I'm terribly honest, I would say that I am somewhat deficient in the patience that would be required to actually put together a longer form work. I do, and I don't mean this as a knock against short stories. I think that it's a wonderful form, but I do very much. I'm the same way. I very much appreciate being able to do essentially the same, go through the same process. There's pre-writing and planning and putting the work together and thinking about it and tweaking it
Mhm.
and then releasing it out into the wild, and then moving on to the next piece. And I do tend to I dedicate a significant amount of time to the stories that I write. I think relatively speaking, like I would say it takes at least a month for me to have a piece to a point where I'm actively seeking publication. So that would be a bit of a stumbling block in doing a longer form work, that delay of gratification in it being finished first and foremost, but also potential publication.
Right. Yeah, and that's in lieu of that, I was wondering about your as far as the process goes, like I what does the brainstorming process look like for you? I mean, does it something just strike you and you just roll with it, and then what does it look like from there? And what is the process and schedule of accomplishing what you have? Because scheduling's a big one too, and like you said, sticking with it.
Right. So yeah, I think that's actually a fairly accurate description. Something just striking. Inspiration, it just kind of comes out of the blue. Um, it's it's I mean, yeah, inspiration, it's hard to will, but no, I'm actually somewhat benefited by living where we live. I love our small community, but as most of our fellow citizens can attest, you oftentimes want to get out of town, and you do have to drive a bit of a ways to do so.
Yes.
And the reason I bring this up is, I think that what I'm struggling to get at is the long drives. I really enjoy those because that allows me a time to kind of zone out and play around with ideas in my imagination. It's times like that where I'm forced into a menial task like driving for an hour, where I do tend to come up with the majority of my ideas. So that's the impetus for most of the works. And then what I'll do, so if inspiration strikes, and typically it's some sort of hook to a story, be it the narrative hook or the ending, or some sort of twist, that's where I'll begin, and I'll jot that down and play around with that, kind of chew it over for a while, and come up with some sort of basic outline. You've already mentioned him at least once, but being a horror writer, I am of course a big fan of Stephen King. And Stephen King, as you may or may not know, he is a big proponent for free writing, and he does a lot of his best work without a ton of planning, or at least that's my understanding. And I've tried that, but I need at least a modicum of planning. I need some sort of basic outline, I've discovered, in order for a work to reach a point of completion where I'm somewhat pleased with the end result.
Right. I need some ground to stand on to flesh it out a little bit. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's about how it is. For me, as much as I would, I still stand by this. As much as I'd love to do what I love doing and have that be my source of income, have that be what I could just do all day. Like there is something in for me, I guess, working, like some of the jobs that I have is, not to diss on them or anything like that, but they've just kind of been like, you learn it and then you can just kind of, wash, rinse, and repeat. But that kind of always allows my mind to wander, or I can like listen to stuff and learn, and it, so that's usually when I think of interesting things on drives, or I'm just kind of occupying some portion of my brain, and the other one is kind of just open and loose to grabbing onto something. And so I resonate with that just as well. But I had another thought on that was writer's block. Does that strike you? And if it does, I'm sure it does. But when it does, do you sit down and just kind of force yourself at it until the cogs start turning, or do you wait until inspiration hits and then you just jump to it when you can?
That's something that has actually I've kind of had that on the mind recently, and not because I've necessarily been suffering writer's block, but and this kind of dovetails with what you were saying earlier about coming to terms with following your dreams not as your primary occupation but more as an avocation, a hobby, for lack of a better word. But I've always been I've always been interested in creative pursuits. I actually initially went to school to study art, and then I decided after I got my associates that I actually wanted to focus on writing and English. But I apologize before I go any further for my rambling answer to your question, but I'm having a multitude of thoughts kind of attacking me at once. But
Yeah.
what I'm driving at is that I'm a pretty busy individual. I teach, as you well know, and that does take up a lot of mental space in addition to time. And I also I've got two young daughters, Hannah and Emma. They're 8 and 4, and um, and of course I have my wife, and so there's lots of responsibilities and other things that I cherish in my life that take up a lot of time. So I don't occupy the same space as a professional writer who is able to dedicate more of his day-to-day life to his creative pursuits. But that's okay, that's totally fine. And I really like what you said. I totally agree with it. I've totally come to terms with that. I'm very content with my lot in life. I've got a lovely family, and I've got a great job, and I live in a great community. And so I'm not upset that I am not able to do writing as my primary occupation.
Right.
But I find the time here and there where I can. I tend to do a lot of the writing later at night. The summertime is a pretty productive time for me for obvious reasons. But
So stand by for some more Mr. Alexander's work this summer.
yeah, but possibly, yeah. But
Fantastic.
another thing that came to mind that I wanted to mention was writer's block. So I the reason I brought all up the reason I bring up being busy is I haven't really attacked writing in earnest until relatively recently, and you know I suppose
Yeah.
I could be upset about that, but I'm really not, because it wasn't because I, you know, just willfully neglected the thing that I love. It's that I was busy. I was living
Mhm.
life, and I have finally got to a place in my life where I do enjoy a little bit more free time to pursue something like this. And let me take another sidebar, and I do apologize for all the tangents,
Oh
but
no, this is what I was looking for. Don't you worry.
I applaud you for your pursuit of this podcast. I think it's awesome at your young age undertaking a project like this. I think it's so cool, and
Thank you.
yeah, just think that's really fantastic. But so I did write occasionally. I've always loved writing. I've always wanted to pursue it more in earnest, but really it wasn't until last year or the year before that I really forced myself to set aside the time that is necessary to not just begin a project, but follow it to completion and have it published.
Right. And you said, yeah, you mentioned something that made me think of this, that it's once you get going, like, and I feel like this every time I start really like getting together, because that's like I've been even just this project, I've been talking about this since back in high school. This has been a discussion and something I've wanted to pursue. There's kind of coming culminating all the things I've always wanted to do, and so now that I feel like I've gotten to where I'm at, I feel like every time you get to that point, no matter what your project is or what whatever it is you're doing, you're always going to look back and say, I wish, there'll be a part of you that wishes that you had started this earlier, because you think like, if I had done this then when I was just dabbling, or whenever I just thought of it, how much further along would I be? Would I be the Stephen King of my field? I mean, probably not, but I'd be further along. So I think that's just inevitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, there's definitely that fear that you're squandering your talent and your opportunity in whichever realm those lie. But at the same time, again, I don't really feel too bad if I'm honest with myself, and I could be mistaken, but if I'm really truly introspective, and I think back to when I was younger and the level of my skills and the maturity that I enjoyed or lacked, depending on your perspective.
Sure.
And I don't say this to toot my own horn or to, make it sound like I think that my current work is magnificent. I mean, there's always room for growth, and I've certainly got plenty of room to grow myself, and I'm continually striving to better my craft. But I don't think that let me put it this way. So, I being an English teacher and teaching others how to write and how to appreciate literature, that has most certainly strengthen my own understanding. I mean, they say when you go to school to be a teacher, they say one of the best ways to learn something is to teach it. And I, wholeheartedly believe that. You gain a much deeper understanding and a much a more intimate appreciation of the subject matter. And so the time that I did not pursue writing in earnest, I still was inching towards where I am now, just in other ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like almost like I in my own experience looking back, I can say, I maybe wasn't specifically building the foundations of this specific project, but I was honing in my skills of I mean, some of the people I've already had on this show, I didn't know before. Like, had I started then, when I say like high school, for example, I wouldn't have even known some of these people, and two, I'm not going to try to say like this, even just doing this project in particular has honed a lot of my skills in trying to interview people and discuss and all that. But and I don't want to toot my own horn, but it's something I've always thought I was decent at. But just when I wasn't pursuing this project specifically, I met all these people, and on top of that, I was honing my talking skills. Even in my times where, if I say, sorry to admit it, when I was partying and being reckless and all that, I was meeting people and I was talking and like maintaining conversations and all that. And that's kind of exactly what it is I do now. So, and I like to think that if had I started then, would I have been any good? Like, I mean, I'm not trying to say I've nailed it now, but how inexperienced would I have been then? And, I don't know.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And I can say the same thing. I've made connections in the writing community over the last couple of years, and they've proved extremely beneficial as far as hearing outside perspectives on technique and that sort of thing. It's been invaluable. So yeah, absolutely, that's an excellent point.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's always it's super good to hear you say this, because I'm never trying to I'm not trying to drag anyone down. It's just kind of like hearing something from someone who loves to create. And I mentioned this earlier that it's really good to talk to somebody who understands that struggle of. I mean, there was another question I had, but I think we're kind of honing in on it. It was just the motivation factor of getting up every day and continuing to do the side hobby. Because I mean, in your case, I know you're also an English teacher, so you kind of do your career in and of itself applies to something you love. But kind of it's easy for you to maybe get off of work, and especially you've got a family, you got duties there. I'm sure you have other little hobbies that we that I don't know about. Maybe like for me, I like playing video games and all that. So it's kind of the motivation factor of getting up in the morning, and especially if you're trying to do something in earnest. Like anymore, I get up and I think about, okay, like what can I do for my projects? What can I do to do all this? So I guess we're kind of already covering that, but
no, yeah, and that's I actually had if not the same idea, but a similar idea in mind. But I do think that when I was young, I was really, really into drawing, and for a lot of my adolescence, I thought that I was going to grow up to be an artist. And I remember an art teacher that I had, an art teacher that I, whose skill I admired. But I remember it's just one of those indelible moments from childhood. But for whatever reason, I clearly remember him saying to me that he thought that you could teach anyone how to draw. And I think one of the reasons why that stuck with me is I didn't necessarily agree with it. I'll be charitable and say that I think what he was trying to impart to me in that moment does hold some truth. But the reason I bring this up now is I don't think that everybody, well, this isn't a radical statement to make, but not everybody is or values being creative. I don't think that that's a bad thing. I just think that creative individuals, I think that a prerequisite is a certain personality type. And I feel conviction in saying this because it's been borne out in the relationships that I've made in the writing community. I've made some really solid friendships with some writers. We live in a wonderful age, even though the current year is terrible.
Sure.
more broadly speaking, the era that we live in, it's a really fantastic time to be alive, because I've befriended writers from all over the country, and it's very unlikely that I'm ever going to see these people face to face. But because of social media and technology, we've been able to establish what I would consider to be significant relationships, and I've been able to discover commonalities in our demeanors and our personalities. And I do think that what I'm driving at is I do think that it is a particular type of person who is going to not only find value in, but actually suffer a little bit in order to create something.
Right. And I do want to touch on well, I'll get to it, but your teaching. We've talked a lot about the writing, but I do want to say that here's another reason why I also believe it's almost better that I hadn't started when I had, because I think at that time, and for a while in my life, I thought it's especially when you're young and you don't know, your brain's forming still. You got a lot, there's a lot going on. The world seems the way it does. You're sure you have all the answers and all that. And something I always thought about was, and what I realized that what it was later, but I was always confused as to why I was wanting to create and I was wanting to do this, and my brain worked a certain way. And there was just some people that I met that I thought they were lacking something, that they were, I guess, stupid, you could say, but that's obviously wasn't the case. What I learned later was that not everyone can be the way that I am, because what I am is I'm just someone that wants to create. I wake up every morning and I don't, if I just sat on my butt, or if I just, even if I just worked all day, if I just went and worked, whatever job all day long, I wouldn't feel fulfilled. But it's good that not everyone is like that. The world wouldn't function if we had a bunch of tanners running around, trying to write and record. No work would get done. The world would collapse. So it's good that there's people who do feel fulfilled in doing different things. It's just that mine is, both of us is creating, and it's good to recognize that and not look down on other people who aren't that way.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, and I would go so far as to say that one of the really significant moments in my own growing up was when I really truly understood that people do, we're all people, and we need to appreciate the commonalities, the shared humanity. But at the same time, when I fully appreciated and understood that there are significant, rather fundamental differences, and these differences are totally okay, and they should be respected. And that sounds like what you're articulating as well. But yeah, there are people who really just don't see any value in putting pen to paper and inventing a narrative. There's nothing wrong with that. They find value in other pursuits. It takes all sorts of skill and all sorts of people to make the world turn. And personally speaking, and it sounds like we're in the same boat here, but I did enjoy a lot of contentedness once I realized that.
Yeah, no, and it does, and that's something, we don't have to get too much into it, right, or anything like that, but I feel like in these times, I really do think that this is exactly what we're dealing with. I mean, obviously there's a lot more to it, but I will say that I think, that you said there's a contentedness of it, that you can, come to terms with the fact that it takes all sorts of people to make the world work. And if we were all like me, if we were all a certain way, it wouldn't work, but it requires, sometimes I'll even, tell someone about, someone will ask me, like, what is it? What do you do? Because I'm not a hugely, like, I don't go out anymore. I try to just work on my stuff, or, try to work on myself physically or mentally. But it's, some people will ask, like, well, what do you do? And I'll say something, I'll try to explain as best I can. And, they'll be like, well, that's stupid. So I'm like, okay, so you're not that type of person, but I think that it would benefit everybody if we could just kind of find that, realize that we're all different, and all of our skill sets are required in the world. So I'm glad that for you to speak on that, because I feel like that was something I struggled with before when I was even younger, and accepting that about people. But it's, there's some people who will diss on someone like me that likes to create, and they'll diss on somebody who's goes out and works out in the oil fields, or does manual labor or whatever it is. And it's like, well, trust me, if they were all tanners, that work would not be getting done. That's not me.
It's such an easy trap to fall into. There is a basic part of us, and I'm of course speaking about people in general, that greatly fears isolation and not belonging to a group. And I think, kind of as a knee-jerk reaction to that really basic fear, we tend to overcorrect, and we tend to make efforts, and oftentimes these efforts are really harmful, but we make these efforts to force others into groups that they don't necessarily belong to, we try to, force our own interests, our own peculiarities onto others, in the hope that we can broaden our base, right? There's other people
Right.
that are like me, but when you mature and you reach a certain point of understanding, you realize, you don't need to do that. You're not alone. There are other people like you. You do have a tribe, but there are people who are dissimilar to you, and complicated fact of life.
No, that. I'm glad we at least touched on that because I think that is important, and I think it's just important for other people, for anybody even listening, that if you're a creative mind, and I feel like a lot of, there's, exactly like I said, maybe there's this tribe of ours of this creative thinking and wanting to create the kind of things that we do. I think it's just positive for any of them to hear. It's okay to feel that way about, the disconnect with some people, but it'll be okay when you realize that there's plenty of you people like out there like you, excuse me, and so don't be angry about it. Just accept that there you have a community for that part of your personality, but don't let it manifest into hate or disdain for other human beings. So I'm glad that we touched on that, and
If you don't mind, I can actually bring that back around to my occupation, teaching, and I will say, and I'll say this briefly, but being a teacher has also really enabled me to appreciate that fact of life. If you're a teacher who at the very least hopes to do some justice to your students, you quickly come to realize that those individuals who fill the seats in your classroom are just that. They're individuals, and not every single one of them is going to approach the subject matter that you teach the same way as his or her peer. To be somewhat reductive, but in order to illustrate the point, there are students who really like English, and there are students who really loathe English, and
Sure.
I've come to accept that. That's, and you try your best to make it as painless as you can for those students who are not naturally inclined towards English. But there's also, I think, some acceptance that needs to take place. You need to recognize that, this one student is going to be a fantastic writer and is likely going to carry these skills that you're hopefully improving and helping to teach in your classroom. They're going to carry those outside of grade school and into their adult lives. And then there are these other students who they're not going to lean on them nearly as much, but you want to, at least have some sort of positive impact on their skills. And but yeah, anyway.
That's beautiful, because I mean, like, I always wondered that about teaching, because I there's few that do know this actually, but originally I was going to go to college for chemistry is what I wanted to do, but when I actually started going, I went for teaching English. So I took a semester of that, and only time will tell if this was a good or bad idea. I'm going to lean on more of the bad, but I didn't ever continue my education. I kind of just started working on my own personal projects, but I've always wondered that with teachers about how is that, in dealing with students, that, because I mean, I'm 100. I even look back and I think about how I acted in school, and there's sometimes I'm like, ugh, no, but there's some, as far as I'm sure you see your students' talent, you see which ones thrive, with the field that you're in and all that. And I always wondered, like, how do you deal with that? And that, I guess, this kind of tells about that. You kind of have to come to terms with the fact there's probably going to be a student that's going to think what you're doing is irrelevant or stupid, and that could probably, I'm certain that's got to be frustrating.
It can be extremely frustrating. But I will also say that coming to that realization and like I said, accepting it to a degree. Now, when I say accepting it, I don't mean just writing off a student and just deciding beforehand that, you know, this student's never going to be an excellent English student. So, you know, I'm not really going to try with this student. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, you know, adjusting your expectations to a reasonable degree based on the type of individual, the type of personality that you're dealing with. And
Right.
that's actually been a very helpful thing. You know, I feel confident saying that since I actually learned that, and that's something that I had to learn in the classroom, you know,
Yeah, nobody can teach you that skill.
well, and I will freely admit to having instances early in my teaching career where I had students who clearly were very disinterested, and they weren't terribly shy about letting it be known. And you know, that was a significant struggle for me. I mean, that was extremely frustrating, and you know, that frustration really got in the way of me having a better student teacher relationship with certain students. And I will freely admit that. But I think coming to accept that that's just how it's going to be to a certain degree has actually enabled me to come to a place where some of my favorite students are not what you would call English students, if you get the drift.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, I've had students more recently who, you know, they're going to pursue occupations that are about as far removed from English as you could possibly get. And I don't think that any occupation is totally removed from the skills that you develop in English, which is why it is a core class. But still, you know, a kiddo who is determined to go work in the coal mines or go work in the oil field, you know, that's just a different individual than the student who has her heart set on becoming an English teacher herself. So, you know, just recognizing and appreciating that there is this innate difference has, you know, I think it's enabled me to find more success with those students who are not, you know, they don't naturally lean towards the subject.
Sure. And that way, on that note a little bit, I wanted to ask you, because you know, as a kid, you know, from birth, or no matter where you want to start, or maybe just like right at kindergarten up until, you know, they graduate, so much happens with the brain, so much happens, you know, spiritually, physically, mentally, all of that. And you know, you've come to peace with this aspect of, you know, everyone's different, and how the, you know, accepting that can better your career and the rest of your life once you've, you know, punch out for the day. How did you decide that you wanted to do high school specifically, though? Because I don't know, I always thought like maybe teaching young kids, like, you know, elementary school would be the easiest, but then I was like, well, that almost would not fulfill me as much. I feel like I was talking to like little mindless little, I don't know, creatures. I don't know. You weren't going to get any substance out of them.
I hate to admit it, but a big part of that was luck, and I am so happy that I wound up in high school as opposed to an earlier grade, because I have since learned that of the three levels, elementary, middle, and high school, I'm I'm vastly more suited for the upper level. And it's pretty much for the reasons that you state. Now, you know, I don't dislike little kids, but I'm you know, I mean, I've got two that live here at home, and I adore them to death, and they're tons of fun. But as far as my occupation goes, I you know, this goes to, I think, the theme of our discussion, the difference, the inherent differences in people. I just would not find as much value or reward in doing the same sort of education that my wife, for instance, does. So I don't know if you know, but my wife is a preschool teacher. And
Yes.
a less mature Mr. Alexander would have had the same line of thinking that you just shared, you know, playing with little kids. That sounds like a lot of fun, being a goofy, fun-loving elementary or preschool teacher. There's a certain appeal to that. But as I have gotten older and as I've, really grown much more comfortable in my own skin and have discovered just who I am as a person, oh boy, am I so happy that I wound up in high school, because I do very much find more worth in discussing more adult literature and working with relatively older students. So good question.
Right.
That is actually, yeah, that's something I have reflected on that more than once, about how I am so happy that I, largely by chance, largely due to luck, wound up in secondary, as opposed to primary school.
Yeah, right. No, and I always wondered that, and I felt like with my more adult brain, I guess you could say, yeah, you're right. The more immature side always, or part of me, from my perspective, is that yeah, it would seem like just playing with like little kids would be fun, but it wouldn't be as mentally stimulating. And now that I'm older, like as much as high schoolers, I'm sure, like as much as they're hormonal, they're angsty, they have trying to prove a point. There's some of them that I I could see. I reflect back and I think back to times where I was like, man, we were so mean to that teacher. Why were we that way? That we had no reason to be. But
I think that's a universal experience.
yeah,
Well, and I feel the need to clarify. I don't think that my younger grade teaching peers only play with their students. I just want to make that abundantly clear. Rather, that's perhaps what a less mature me would have imagined, with a lack of a more thoughtful consideration of what.
oh yeah, 100%. No, this goes right back to that takes different people to make the world go round, because like oh no, I was just gonna say, yeah, no, what they do is 100% valid and needed. It's just that I think for me personally, looking on that, I would feel like I was just playing with kids and I wasn't teaching or learning myself. I'd be, and maybe I'm wrong. I haven't done it, but I can see your admiration and appreciation for the more being able to play with the adult literature and minds that are at least shaped enough that these guys are about ready to go out into the world. They're ready to like vote. They're going to be part of the community in an adult way. So that's kind of a big deal. And I think that's kind of to me, and I'm just kind of relating to you in that I can see how satisfying that would be. That's my own little clarification on that. Oh, did you have anything to add to that? I interrupted you a bit.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. I like I was saying, that is a pretty universal feeling. I have, and I still certainly can think back to teachers that I had, who I wish I had treated better. Relatively speaking, I was a good student. I don't think that's probably that big of a surprise for you to hear, but for the most part, I was a pretty decent student. But again, everybody has moments of immaturity growing up, and in fact, and I'm sure I shared this with you at one point or another, but when I was in 7th grade, I had a science teacher who I really just admired, and I just thought he was the coolest teacher ever. And so that's actually what led me to do what I'm about to tell you about. I thought, in my stupid 7th grade brain, I thought, oh, he's easygoing. He will be okay with this. But what happened was, he was lecturing, and I sat at the front of the classroom, and and in one of my shining adolescent moments, I managed to bend down without him noticing, and use one hand to tie both of the shoelaces in a knot. He got so mad when he was not able to pull his feet apart after I did that, and it was terrifying.
Oh no.
But oh yes, as an adult, I look back to that and I think, what in the world was I thinking? Oh gosh, I feel so bad for him. I've got a lot of karma coming my way for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the next life, you'll be paying for that one.
No, no, yeah, that's again, that's universal, and
Sure.
um,
Yeah, no, I know. You can look back on that stuff, but hopefully, hopefully you weren't anything that drove them over the edge or anything like that. But I'm sure otherwise they're looking back on it. There was something else. This is pertains to more recent times. I just wanted to ask you about. I mean, it's no, I don't. I try to understand what I mean when I say this. I wanted to ask you, as much as it's kind of been overshadowed by more recent events, I just wanted to ask you about what it was like teaching under the coronavirus standards and all that.
oh
Standards and all
boy,
that.
That had to be a big change.
yes, we are living in history. I think everybody. I think, speaking of universal experiences, I think everybody during long, fairly mundane periods of calm and peace. I think that especially younger people, I think that they look to more turbulent, more exciting times with unearned nostalgia. And what I mean by that is, I can remember being a student in grade school and flipping idly through my history textbook and thinking to myself, man, what would it have been to what would it have been like to live during World War II?
Right. You almost think like, what a time to be alive, but
Right.
Yeah, and you kind of think about it with a tinge of excitement, like here's what I would do, and I think everybody does that. But when you find yourself in these turbulent times, you realize the folly in such daydreaming, and it's a really interesting time, especially to be a teacher. I don't I let me just put it this way. I really hope that next year goes more regularly than this year. I have not particularly enjoyed the unique situation, the distance learning, and a big part of that is just being thrown into it with not a ton of planning. But that seems to have been the consensus from the colleagues that I've spoken to in similar circumstances. I think pretty much everybody is hoping really desperately for a return to normalcy sooner rather than later.
I'm certain for that, especially just like in most cases when it came to, what's gone on this year is that there was no plan for anything. No one, no, like, it's like in your field, it's not like anyone really, or any school or institution or whatever, really had a policy going on where they knew exactly what they were going to do when this kind of, in this sort of situation. So it was probably just, especially like even where I work, at the hospital, it's just kind of like playing along as it goes. It's just kind of trying to, okay, I guess let's try this. We're going to do this. And let's, and there's some things that were just passed down to us. It wasn't anything that we got to decide. It was just a matter of, hey, I guess a pandemic's going on, so we're going to do this and that. And then down the road, it was like, okay, well, you should try this and that. So it's probably this in the same vein of just this. And that's how this whole year has been, just winging it. Just, I mean, at this point, I guess I wouldn't be surprised. Like at this point, I almost anything else that comes around the corner, I'm gonna be like, why not? Like, sure. But as far as the teaching goes for you, I guess what was it just the fact that it was a surprise? Was that the biggest?
Issue
Yeah,
of yours?
yeah. Well, and I think that my approach to teaching, or the type of teacher I am, I think that you might be able to say that that if someone was going to be really thrown by these circumstances, it would be me. The reason I say that is I'm a big planner. I'm relatively unique in that I have the whole year planned out before we even start the first day. A lot of teachers, it seems, I want to say a majority, and I could be mistaken here, but from what I've seen, a lot more educators are more flexible and they tend more to change things as they go. But I like to have everything pretty much set in stone um, beforehand. I don't really like to change on the fly. So I was certainly vulnerable to the sudden change in plans. Um, but actually, one big positive from this whole ordeal with regards to school and teaching, I've been really struck by just how resilient people can be. Early in the distance learning and early in to the school being shut down, I was really fearful about a great number of students and heck, even potentially staff really struggling with the radical sudden change. But for the most part, people rolled with it, and certain students who have a lot of disadvantages in the best of times, even a good number of students who fit that bill, really stepped up and did a admirable job given the new set of circumstances.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. I was worried because obviously I'm not in that world anymore, but I was concerned on to like how was this going to affect the education of some kids, and how, I was kind of worried about what were the worst case scenarios of, is this going to set people back? Are we going to have like a generation of kids that come forward and lack in some departments?
I don't think it was that bad. Now, if we had to do this for a whole year with little to no planning beforehand, that'd be a different story. It was roughly 2 months that we were doing distance learning, and there was a period of maybe 2 weeks where things were kind of up in the air. It was not an ideal situation, and there was a little bit of, I don't know, damage is the word that comes to mind, but even that's not totally accurate. But there were some things that were lost due to the pandemic, and there are still some corrective measures taking place. To be a bit more specific, I personally have a few students, and I'm obviously not going to name names, but I, just generally speaking, I do have a few students who didn't do very well with the distance learning, and some remediation is going to have to take place. But the schools already has plans being put together to take care of that. So a little bit of a setback, but I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah, a lot of this, like you said, it kind of relies on fingers crossed that when we go back to do this again, when the school year starts again, that hopefully things will be in a place, hopefully for the better, but a sense of normalcy, I guess, in that department. So I'm glad that everything went well. I was wondering about that, which was another reason I thought about. I was like, obviously a teacher would be a fantastic source to get a fair point on, at least, I mean, this is in our community and all that, but I'm sure that most communities are facing the same thing. So I'm hoping that all of them, or at least, if not, at least most of them can share a similar success story in that. So that I'm really thankful for that because
And if I could, I'll just add another big positive. Just the whole staff, just the whole school staff. Everybody really came together to do their parts and to even work outside of their traditional role in order to help support each other and facilitate the learning that could take place. Support staff in particular, our paraprofessionals and our special education teachers, they were rock stars. And I think if you ask any of the teachers in the district, they'll say the same thing. But a lot of people really stood up and did what they could to help alleviate the stress and help to ensure success. And we got through it mostly intact. So, mission accomplished, I suppose.
that's all you can ask for, really. Well, and I'm I'm glad for all of that. That's awesome, and I'm like I said, I hope that the rest of our country and the world can share a similar success story, because this is our future that we're relying on. These people, like I said, these folks, that some of them that graduated this year, they're going to be out voting. They're going to be out, they're going to be adults. They're going to be among us, and that I hope that I don't want the times to wrong them in a way that we don't have productive, creative, wonderful people in society. But on that note, I wanted to just shift things over and ask you just a little bit about and some more closing thoughts about some advice that maybe you could shed on the times, especially because with as crazy as things have gotten, things are weird, and I think we can both agree on that. But
oh yes, absolutely. I appreciate the question, Tanner. I'm not sure how helpful my advice is going to be, but I will tell you with real sincerity that the temperature, the temp, not the temperature that we measure by the thermostat, but the temperature of conflict and emotion right now is just way too high. And sure. I don't think that I think it's helpful if more people rather than exacerbating conflict because they disagree with what they perceive to be the other side. I really think that we'd be in a lot better shape if more people would kind of just keep their heads down and try to I'm really struggling to say this, so let me put it this way. I have, during this time, I certainly have strong opinions, and I know where I stand in the multitude of conflicts that the nation seems to be hashing out right now. But rather than add fuel to the fire by asserting my allegiance to one side or the other, I'm content to pursue my hobbies. I'm content to spend this time to pursue my writing, and I think that that's maybe a good thing, because I don't want to, like I said, the temperature's too high. I don't want to add to that. So take that for whatever it's worth. I don't mean to denigrate anybody who does voice strong convictions, but just personally speaking, I'm happy not to add to the temperature.
Hopefully I'm not adding to it either, but I guess luckily I'm willing to take at least just a tiny bit, because this is my show and this is what I do, so I have to accept that. But I like to think that, well, of course I'm sure everyone thinks this about themselves, but I like to think that I try to go about things with a level-headedness and understand that there's always two sides, if not more, to a story. And I just think that right now, this is why I appreciate what I do. And I sit down and I communicate with somebody.
Oh, and let me just say, I think that this is a good venue. I think the venue does make a big difference. Having a sincere discussion and discussing the topics, the controversial topics of the day with someone who you can trust operate in good faith and provide honest feedback, that's a very worthwhile pursuit. But I don't know, I getting on social media and arguing primarily because it tickles your lizard brain, that's what I am trying
Yeah, no, that's just
to
it. That's
personally avoid.
as far as like with this, then this is the what we're having right now. What you and I are doing is this is the disconnect that this is the thing that social media is lacking. Social media, you can just get on it and you can just throw out whatever sound, just make a sound bite. You can just put something out there and people's emotions will just run high. And I think some of that is good. I think the net positive of social media, there's perhaps more positive or at least potential positive there. But there's also a bit of that negative there where a lot of what people, and I think maybe we're starting to suffer from some of that just to some degree, maybe, is it's raising the temperature because it's just people throwing something out emotionally and then people reacting to it emotionally. And then there's just this constant steady stream of emotion. Whereas what we're doing right now is this, and this is what I enjoy about what I've been doing, is you're sitting down and right now we're two human beings talking. We could all of a sudden just decide to be nasty and mean towards each other, but there's a reservation there because you're either face to face with that person, which is what I've done. Ours is, this is my first experiment with distant, recording, so you are my guinea pig that way a little bit. Yeah, yeah, for sure. But still, like I'm talking to you, and you kind of, you can't rely on your little monkey lizard brain, whatever. You kind of have to communicate. Like if you were to press me for questions or I to press you for questions, you have to you can't just throw out a soundbite, otherwise you sound insane, and that shows. But that kind of works in social media. So I think that's what I really enjoy about this. But I think that's, I guess, some of my thoughts on what's going on is there's a lack of communication and there's a lot of us just ingesting information. It's maybe to a point that is negative. Like you want to read the news, you want to see what the atmosphere is, and you want to share your opinion. But I think that to some degree how we're going about it is raising the temperature, is kind of instigating a little bit. And I think that what we would find if we did communicate is that most of us on the planet, at least for sure in our country, most people are on the same team and most people want what is best, and most people do, we appreciate one another, and I think we could love one another if we just, but it's communication. And I think sometimes what's getting in the way is how we're ingesting news, the social media. It's kind of, I just hope everyone takes it with a grain of salt is all. And I think that there's, obviously in the times there's a lot that does need to be changed. There's a lot that does need to be done. But I think that instead of, maybe fighting each other, or sometimes you scroll through and you see people arguing amongst each other, and I'm like, I thought we were all on the same side. I thought we all agreed, that all human beings matter. Our species matters, and our species can go to amazing places we have to work together. And I think that should be a goal of our species. But, let's not let technology, social media, and all the fun stuff get in the way of that is all. It's communication. And I guess I hope to have my platform be something that, I've loved it so far. I sit down and I talk to people, and you get to see that, like, have you're face to face, or you're hearing them and you're talking to them, you're sharing ideas. I think that's what I love about this, and I hope to be positive. I'm sure there's times where I'm maybe not so much on my show, and that's just another work in progress, I guess. But that's the communication is something I really want to voice to people. That's a big thing that I want to relay to others. I think it's important. I will say that.
Well, earlier in our conversation, I mentioned how wonderful it is to be alive in this time due to the social media and the technology, and it's still relatively new. As a society, we're still dealing with the ramifications of being able to converse with a total stranger on the other side of the world. With little to no consequences. So, I think you're totally right. I think that we are still learning how to navigate the social media and the communications technology, and hopefully with not in too much time we'll have a better, more mature grasp of how to ethically and positively wield this technology.
Right, and I'm sure both of us share, our own specific thoughts on things, but I think that most of us, coming together would, especially in learning about this technological curve, would find that most of us are more on the same page than we really think. And I think that, and when most of us, no matter what our specifics are, at this point, man, I'm just like, if I were the leader, if I were the president, I'd say, let's just try some stuff, man. We're yelling about what works, what doesn't work, but let's I guess none of us really know for sure unless we try. I don't know. It's just, I think there's a level of communication and accepting that we don't actually have all the answers that we think we do is important. And of course, like we were talking about, the technology curve is a big one, but I'm so hopeful that this ends on a positive note. And of course, there's the selfish part of me that's going, you guys are ruining my plans. Stop it. Which is so selfish, of course, but can't help it. In some just a closing thought, I wanted to ask you, I mean, I know that I know that they've interfered with my plans, but did you have any summer plans or anything you still have on the calendar?
Oh, gosh. I am my wife and I we're homebodies, so we've handled this better than I think most. But even we, are getting a bit stir crazy, and I think we're okay. I think we're okay. No. Well, I guess I was about to say no major plans were thwarted, but we were gonna have my wife's parents come and stay with us for most of the summer. They live in Tokyo, but fortunately, early in this whole mess, we kind of saw the writing on the wall and said, hey, we probably need to reconsider those plans, and I'm happy that we did in retrospect. But other than that, no, we've done well, and that's actually that's another thing that I've had to realize throughout this pandemic, just how fortunate I am and my family is for what we have. We've been able to weather this better than a lot of people, and it's caused me to realize just how important it is to not be blinded by your own limited perspective, or not to be not to rely on your own limited perspective too much, and to realize that again, people are individuals, and we're not all in, as I read earlier today, we're not all in the same boat, but we are in the same storm. Yeah. We're doing fine though. And I hope you're doing fine too.
Oh, I'm doing great so far. Same here. Even during the coronavirus, I was very fortunate that that things didn't hit me the way that they've hit others, and for that I'm hugely appreciative. I think that some of what we're facing now is just the fact that we were locked up for a long time, and emotions run high as they were before. So I think I hope that we're just dealing with some repercussions, and I hope that everything remains everything. This doesn't need to, there's some people you hear talking and they're like, this is the end and blah, whatever. And I'm like, no. I think that in the end, the humans will persevere. And I hope that both of us continue to do well as much as everyone else. I hope everyone else can find a way to end this positive. Maybe 2020 wasn't our year, but as much as us hoped that would when we were making our New Year's resolutions, but let's wrap this year up. Let's work on it, wrap the year up, and let's shoot for a better one next year. And I think, should everyone participate, should everything go on a positive note, things will be okay. And I'm super hopeful for that. But something I'm super appreciative of is that you agreed to do this show with me, Mr. Alexander.
Yeah, well, I'm very I'm happy and honored that you invited me to do this.
Well, thank you, and I will totally remember some of the folks, in this thing I've chosen to do. It's tricky just because you're asking someone to give up some of their time, and for them, maybe they'll see the value in the conversation, and that's compensation enough. But for many, it's hard to get them to give up their time to do something that I guess you could almost argue mostly benefits me, I guess. So for people who are willing to make that sacrifice is something that I'm hugely appreciative of, and I'll remember it. And so I just thank you so much, and I hope that your family and you do great, and you guys are in these crazy times. Just be safe, keep yourselves mentally and physically okay, and I look forward to talking to you again. I think this is the most we've got to sit down and chit chat, and for both of us, for the two of us together, my entire life, both of our entire lives.
Well, I've enjoyed the conversation, Tanner, and I think this is really awesome. Best of luck.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening, and then just thank you again.
All right, you too. See you, Tanner.
All right. See you, Mr. Alexander.